"Look at her feet," a woman murmured behind a painted fan, and the words traveled the length of the ballroom faster than any music. "She has ruined the floor. Someone ought to send for her people before she disgraces them further." Honora Wexcombe stood very still in the center of the polished marble, and she did not look down at the two dark stains blooming through the pale ice-blue silk of her slippers. She knew what was there. She had known since the 3rd mile, when the numbness in her toes had given way to something warmer and worse, and she had kept walking anyway because the child in her arms had stopped shivering, and that had frightened her more than her own feet ever could. The candles in the great chandelier trembled overhead, 10,000 small flames throwing amber light down onto 400 guests, and the music faltered as the fiddlers followed the turn of every head. A country dance had been forming. Now it dissolved. The couples nearest her drew back their skirts and their sleeves, as though ruin were a thing that spread by touch, and a ring of empty marble opened around her like water pulling away from a stone. "Hysterical," said the same voice, louder now, emboldened by the silence. It belonged to Lady Marian, a dowager of enormous consequence and enormous fan, and she pronounced the word as one might name a disease. I have said all season that the Wexcombe girl was not sound. A young woman who vanishes from her own aunt's card party without a word, who has gone through an entire snow-bound night, and who returns to a ball 2 evenings later with blood in her dancing slippers. It is not eccentricity. It is a want of proper feeling. She is not fit for society, and I dare say her poor aunt shall have the devil's own time settling her now. Honora heard every word. She heard them as one hears rain on a window from a warm room, distant and continuous, and not, in the end, her concern. She had rehearsed no defense on the long carriage ride from her aunt's house, because there was no defense that would not require her to speak of things she had promised, silently, over a sleeping child's damp hair, that she would never make into a story for people like these. So she said nothing. Her aunt, Mrs. Alderton, materialized at her elbow in a rustle of bronze taffeta and mortification. "Honora," she breathed, gripping her niece's wrist with fingers that shook. "Honora, for the love of heaven, what have you done to yourself? Your feet. People are looking. People will not stop looking. Come away this instant, before it is past mending." "I am quite well, Aunt," Honora said, and her voice was low and level, and did not carry as Lady Marian's carried, which was perhaps why no one believed her. "I only wished to hear the music. I have been 3 days without much of anything worth hearing. You are not well. Look at you. You are gray as a Sunday goose, and you are bleeding onto Lady Frampton's floor." Mrs. Alderton pressed the back of her hand to her niece's cheek, and then snatched it away as though scalded. "Child, you are burning. You are burning up, and you came to a ball. Have you gone entirely out of your senses?" And that, Honora thought, was the trouble with a family that loved you. They could feel the fever and still not think to ask where you had walked to catch it. The whispers gathered momentum, feeding on themselves as whispers always do. She caught fragments of them as they eddied past, that she had run off with a groom, that she had lost her reason over some man who would not have her, that the Wexcombe fortune, what little there was of it, had made her wild, and that a girl of 22 with no mother living, and a father 3 years in his grave, was bound to come to grief without a firm hand to check her. Every fragment was wrong. Not one of them touched the shape of the true thing. The true thing was still asleep, she hoped, in a house 4 miles east of this one, under 3 blankets and the watch of a physician's steadiest nurse, and the true thing was named Tibby, and was 6 years old, and had very nearly died in the snow, and Honora would have walked the 3 miles again barefoot over broken glass, rather than surrender that child's small dignity to Lady Marian's fan. "Take me home, Aunt," she said. "You are right. I should not have come." But before Mrs. Alderton could steer her toward the doors, a new sound moved through the room, and it was not a whisper. It was the sound of a crowd parting for someone it did not dare to whisper about. The Duke of Ravenscar had entered the ballroom. He came in from the card-room with his coat still buttoned and his face still set in the closed, courteous expression the Ton had spent 5 seasons failing to read, and he was perhaps the only man in England who could silence Lady Marian by the simple act of being present. He was 36, tall, dark-haired, dressed in a deep burgundy tailcoat that the candlelight loved, and he was known to the assembled company by 3 facts and 1 rumor. The 3 facts were that he was unmarried, that he was rich beyond the ordinary run of dukes, and that he had taken his medical degree at Edinburgh before he had come into the title, which made him, in the eyes of the Ton, a great man with an unaccountably vulgar hobby. The rumor was that he had refused every eligible young lady presented to him for 5 years running, and that he intended, insultingly, to die a bachelor. He did not at first appear to see Honora at all. His gaze moved across the room the way a physician's gaze moves across a sick room, taking inventory, and then it stopped. It stopped on her feet. She saw the exact moment the meaning reached him, because his whole face changed. Not into pity, which she could have borne even less than the whispers. Into recognition. The Duke looked at the blood soaking through a young woman's ruined dancing slippers, and where 400 people had seen either scandal or spectacle, he saw a wound, and he understood at once, with the swift certainty of a man trained to read a body's testimony, exactly what had made it. He crossed the marble in the hush. "Do not," Honora said to him, very quietly, before he had reached her. It was almost the first thing she had said above a murmur all evening, and it came out fierce. "Whatever you have come to say, Your Grace, do not. I would rather the whispers." "I know you would," the Duke said. "That is precisely why I cannot allow it." And there, in the center of the floor, under the trembling chandelier, before Lady Marian and her fan, and 400 of the best-born people in the county, the Duke went down on one knee. A gasp went through the room like wind through wheat. To kneel was to court. To kneel was a thing dukes did not do. And never in public, and never to a girl the whole Ton had spent the last quarter-hour agreeing was unfit. Mrs. Alderton made a small strangled sound. Lady Marian's fan stopped moving entirely, but the Duke was not looking at any of them. He had knelt, and he was looking at Honora's ruined slippers, and when he spoke his voice was pitched to carry to the farthest corner of the room, clear and unhurried and terribly calm. "Before any of you says another word about this woman," he said, "I am going to tell you where she got these." 2 nights earlier, the snow had begun falling on the county a little after 4 in the afternoon, and by 6 it had shut the roads. Honora had not meant to be out in it. She had gone, dutifully and without enthusiasm, to a card party at her aunt's. A small dull gathering of dowagers and their unmarried nieces, the sort of evening designed to remind a girl of 22 that she was neither young enough to be forgiven her opinions, nor rich enough to be indulged in them. She had lost 11 shillings at whist, listened to a great deal of talk about other people's marriages, and slipped out at 8:30 to breathe the cold air on the terrace, and to be for a quarter of an hour entirely alone. That was where she heard the crying. It was thin and high, and nearly swallowed by the wind, and at first she took it for a cat. Then she took it for the wind itself. Then she went down the terrace steps into the swirling white, with a branch of candles cupped against the gale, and she found, at the bottom of the garden where the estate wall gave onto the lane, a child. The child was perhaps 6 years old, in a nightgown and a single shoe, half buried already where she had fallen against the base of the wall, and she was crying the way children cry when they have been crying a very long time and have nearly given it up. Honora set down the candles, which the wind promptly killed, and gathered the child up out of the snow. And the child's skin against her own was so cold it seemed to burn. "There now," Honora said, because she did not know what else to say. "There now. I have you. I have you. What is your name, love? How did you come to be here?" "Tibby," the child managed, through teeth that clattered. "I am Tibby. I was going home. The carriage broke, and coachman went for help and told me stay, but it was so cold, and I saw a light, so I walked, and then I couldn't find the road." "Whose child are you, Tibby? Who is your family?" "My guardian," the child said, and her eyes rolled white with the effort of staying awake. "The Duke. I live with the Duke now. Since my mama." And then her small head tipped against Honora's collarbone, and she said no more. Honora knew of the Duke. Everyone knew of the Duke. And she knew, because it had been the talk of 3 dinner parties that autumn, that the great man had lately taken into his household the orphaned daughter of a distant cousin, a widow dead of a lung fever, and that the fashionable world had thought it very odd and very like him. A bachelor duke playing nursemaid to a dead cousin's brat, when he might have paid a family in Bath to take her off his hands. She looked back at her aunt's house. It was perhaps 200 yards behind her through the storm, warm and lit and full of dowagers who would exclaim and fuss and send a footman in an hour for a physician who could not come over roads that were already gone. She looked east, where the child had pointed, where the Duke's great house stood 3 miles off across the snow. There was no true choice in it. The child was cold to the center of her, and going colder. 200 yards to a warm room, and an hour's delay might cost this small stranger her life, and 3 miles to a house with a physician in it might save it, if Honora could keep her warm en route, if Honora could find the road, if Honora's own body held out. She was young, and she was strong, and she had walked those lanes since girlhood. She took off her cloak and wrapped the child in it, over her own thin evening dress, and she set off east into the blizzard in her dancing slippers, because there had been no time to send back to the house for boots, and every minute mattered more than her feet did. She did not remember most of the walk afterward. She remembered that the child grew heavy, the particular dead heaviness of a sleeping body, and that she had to keep waking her, keep talking to her, keep the small heart interested in beating. She remembered singing, though she could never afterward recall what. She remembered that at some point the pain in her feet had become a great roaring thing, and then, worse, had become nothing at all. She remembered that the snow got into her slippers and packed and froze, and that each step past the 2nd mile was a step taken on she knew not what. She remembered the fever coming up in her, like a tide somewhere in the 3rd mile, the heat and the shivering both at once, and she remembered thinking, with a strange floating clarity, that she must not fall, because if she fell, she would not rise, and if she did not rise the child would freeze against her. She did not fall. She came up the Duke's long drive a little after midnight, and she beat on his door with a fist she could no longer feel, and when the door opened on a blaze of light and a startled footman, she said only, "The child. Take the child. She is very cold. Wake your master, he is a physician. Tell him she is near frozen." And she put the small burden into the footman's arms, and then, her work done, she sat down quite suddenly on the icy stone, because her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her. The master of the house had been awake. He had stood so for a good 3 hours, in fact in his shirt-sleeves at the window of his study, because his coachman had come back on foot near 10 o'clock, with his horses lamed and his story broken. And the story was that the carriage carrying Miss Tibby home from her afternoon visit to the parson's wife had gone into a ditch 2 miles out, and that he had left Tibby inside the carriage with the lap-robes and gone for help as any sensible man would, and that when the help came the carriage stood empty and the child was gone into the snow. They had been searching for 2 hours. He had sent every man he had and gone out himself with a lantern into a storm that killed the light in a dozen yards, and he had come back only to organize a wider search and to keep himself from going mad. He was a physician. He knew, better than any of the men out looking, precisely how long a 6-year-old child could last in such a cold, and precisely what the cold did, in what order, and how it ended, and he had been standing at his window, doing the arithmetic of it, and hating every number. So when the knock came, and the footman's voice cracked up the stairwell, he was down them before the man had finished the sentence. He took the child out of the footman's arms, and he was already reading her before he had crossed the hall, one hand at her throat, his ear to her chest, his thumb lifting an eyelid. Bring her to the fire, not too near. Blankets warmed, but not hot. Broth when she can take it, not before. His voice had gone entirely flat and entirely fast, the voice of a man who has stopped feeling anything so that he can be useful. She is alive. She is very cold, but she is alive. Someone kept her warm. He looked up. Who kept her warm? Where is? And then he saw the woman on his doorstep. She was sitting on the frozen step in an evening dress with no cloak, and her lips were blue, and her hair had come down and frozen in ropes, and she was looking at him with a terrible calm. And her feet, he saw her feet. Her feet were in the tattered remains of what had been silk dancing slippers, and they were bleeding, and they were the wrong color, the gray-white color that a physician learns to dread. She is warm, Honora said. I kept her warm. Is she, will she? You may come in out of the cold now, the Duke said, and something in his flat physician's voice broke very slightly on the words. You have done the thing. You may stop now. Come in. I do not think, Honora said with immense dignity and a small apologetic smile, that I can stand up. Your Grace, I find my feet are not entirely mine at present. So the Duke, who had knelt to no one in 5 years, went down onto the icy stone and gathered a half-frozen stranger up into his arms as easily as he had gathered the child, and carried her in out of the snow, and he did not put her down for a long time. What followed, Honora only half remembered, and never told anyone, and the Duke never told anyone either until the night of the ball. She remembered warmth coming back into her by degrees, and that the coming back of it was worse by far than the cold had been, that it was the single most painful thing she had ever felt, and that she wept from it and was ashamed of the weeping. She remembered his hands, which were very gentle and entirely impersonal, easing what was left of the slippers away from feet she could not look at. She remembered his voice, low and steady, telling her exactly what he was doing, and exactly what he was afraid of, and exactly what he hoped, treating her not as a delicate creature to be managed, but as a fellow soldier owed the truth of her own condition. You have frostbite in 3 toes of the left foot and 2 of the right, he told her somewhere in that long red and white night. I do not yet know how deep it goes. The bleeding is from the walking, the skin split. That will heal. The cold is the question, and the cold does not answer for some days, so I will not lie to you and tell you all is well when I do not know it. What I can tell you is that you have a strong fever, that the fever is your body's own physic, and I mean to help it and not fight it, and that if you had walked another mile, I do not think we would be having this conversation. He paused. You walked 3 miles in the snow in dancing slippers, carrying a child with a fever already coming on. Do you understand what you did? I understand that she is warm, Honora said, and breathing. I heard her breathing when you laid her down. That is the only part I trouble to understand. The Duke was quiet for a moment. He was a man to whom courage was a professional interest, something he saw at its best and its worst across a great many sickbeds, and he had long ago stopped being surprised by it. He was surprised now. Most people, he said at last, when they have done something remarkable, wish very much for it to be known. They tell the story before their coat is off. You have not asked me whether the child will live. You have told me she is breathing, and declared yourself satisfied. Will she live? Honora asked. I believe she will. Because of you. Let there be no doubt of that between us. Whatever else happens. He drew a blanket up over her feet, hiding the ruin of them. Now, you will stay the night, and the day after, and as many days as your fever and your feet require, and I will hear no argument, because I am a duke and a physician, and you are in no condition to walk to the door, let alone through it. What is your name? Honora Wexcombe. My aunt is Mrs. Alderton of the Grange. She will be frightened for me. Then I will send to her the moment the roads allow, which will not be tonight. Rest, Miss Wexcombe. He rose, and at the door he stopped, and turned back, and looked at her with an expression she could not read, and would spend some weeks trying to. The child's name is Tibby. Tabitha. She is my cousin's daughter, and her mother died in the spring, and she has not, until tonight, had a great deal of luck in the world. She is mine to keep now, and I keep what is mine. You should know that you have not merely done a kind thing for a stranger. You have done it for the one person in this house I would have given my own 2 feet to save. So, he inclined his head, a small, precise bow. Sleep. You are safe here. Nothing in this house will trouble you but the mending, which troubles everyone. And he was gone, and Honora lay in a strange bed in a great man's house, with her ruined feet hidden under a warm blanket, and she listened for the child's breathing through the wall, and could not hear it, and told herself that this was because the walls were thick, and not because anything was wrong. And somewhere in the telling she fell into the deep, swift sleep of the truly spent, and the fever carried her the rest of the descent down into a country with no dowagers in it at all. She woke to sunlight on snow, and a small weight on the edge of the bed. Tibby sat there in a clean nightgown, 3 sizes too large, her feet dangling, her face pale but her eyes bright, and in her lap she held a small object which she was turning over and over in her fingers, with the fierce concentration of the very young. It was a bird, Honora saw when her eyes came clear, a little wooden robin, no bigger than a plum, carved rough and painted rougher, its red breast worn nearly to bare wood by much handling. You are awake, Tibby announced, as though it were a considerable achievement on Honora's part. Cousin Duke said I might sit and watch you, but not to touch you, and not to talk if you were sleeping. But you are not sleeping now, so I may talk. May I talk? You may talk, Honora said. Her voice came out a cracked whisper. 3 days, she would learn, had passed. The fever had held her for the better part of 2 of them. I was very cold, Tibby confided, in the snow. But you carried me, and you sang. You do not sing very well. Cousin Duke says I am not to say so, but it is true, and I think it is better to say true things quietly than false things loudly, that is what he says, so I am saying it quietly. She held up the wooden robin. This is Robin. My mama carved him. He is the only thing I have that is my mama's. When I was in the snow I held him so tight I could not feel my hand, but I did not let him go. And when I woke up, he was on the pillow next to me, because Cousin Duke put him there. He said a person ought to wake up next to the thing they love. She considered this. Are you the thing I love now? Because you carried me, or is it still Robin? I think, Honora said gravely. There is room enough to love a girl and a robin both. Hearts are larger than they look. May I see him? Tibby placed the little bird into Honora's palm with enormous ceremony, and Honora turned it over and saw where a loving amateur hand had cut the feathers, and where the paint had gone on too thick, and where a child's grip had worn the red to nothing, and she understood that she was holding the whole of a dead woman's love for her daughter, rendered in a thing the size of a plum. And she gave it back very carefully. That was the first morning. There were 11 of them in the end, 11 mornings in the Duke's house, while her feet decided whether they would keep all their parts, and by the third Honora had stopped counting them as an imposition, and by the sixth she had begun, guiltily, to dread their ending. The house, she came to understand, was not what the Tun believed it to be. The Tun believed its Duke cold. He was not cold. He was contained, which is a different thing, and Honora, who had spent 3 years being told that her own containment was a coldness of heart, recognized it in him at once. He was a man who felt a very great deal, and had learned, at some cost she could not yet see, to feel it quietly. She watched him with the servants, and saw that he knew all their names, and the names of their children, and which of them had a mother ailing in the village. She watched him with Tibby, and saw a man entirely out of his depth, and entirely determined to swim. A bachelor of 36 relearning the world through the eyes of a grieving 6-year-old, sitting on the floor of his own library, in his good coat, because that was where the child had chosen to be. I do not know how to do it, he confessed to Honora one evening, when Tibby had at last been coaxed to sleep, and the two of them sat on either side of the fire with the particular ease of people who have seen each other at their worst. I know how a child's body works to the last small bone. I have not the faintest notion of a child's heart. I gave her a nursery full of dolls, and she wanted only the wooden bird. I engaged the best governess in the county, and she wept until I sent the woman away. I read her a treatise on natural philosophy suitable for young minds, and she asked me to tell her instead about the time I fell out of a tree, which I did once, at 9, and broke my arm, and which is apparently the finest thing I have ever done. He shook his head. I am failing her, Miss Wexcombe. Kindly, expensively, but failing. You are not failing her, Honora said. You are learning her. Those are not the same, though they feel the same from the inside. She looked into the fire. When my father died, I was 19, and everyone told me the correct things, and did the correct things, and the only person who helped me at all was the old gardener, who did not tell me anything correct. He simply put a trowel in my hand and said the beds wanted weeding, and stood beside me while I did it, and cried into the dirt. He did not know the first thing about a girl's heart either, but he knew a girl wants to be beside someone, and given a small useful thing to do. Give her a small useful thing to do, Your Grace. She does not want treatises. She wants to matter to you in a way she can see. The Duke looked at her for a long moment across the fire, and something moved behind his contained face, and he said, You are a very unusual woman, Miss Wexcombe. I am a very ordinary woman who has had an unusual amount of practice at being underestimated, Honora said. It teaches one to watch. There is not a great deal else to do when one is being overlooked, but watch the people who are doing the overlooking. I have made rather a study of it. And what does your study tell you of me? Are you certain you wish to hear it? A man of your rank is not often told the answer to that question. I find I am weary of not being told things, the Duke said. The whole county tells me only what it imagines I wish to hear. My steward tells me the tenants are content when I know 2 of them are not. My lawyers tell me the law is on my side when I can hear in their voices that it is not. Even my own butler, a man I would trust with my life, tells me the fish is fresh when it is a day past fresh. because he cannot bear to trouble me. I am drowning in small, comfortable lies, Miss Wexcombe. It is a peculiar loneliness, being lied to kindly by everyone who loves you. Then I shall tell you the truth and be unkind, Honora said. Please, be as unkind as you can manage. I promise you it will be a relief. You may not thank me for it. I have not thanked anyone honestly in years, the Duke said. I should like to try it and see whether I remember how. Come, tell me what I am. I have asked the question, and I mean to hear the whole answer, however it stings, and I give you my word I shall not send you home in a snowstorm for it. That, said Honora, is a very low bar for gratitude, Your Grace. It is the bar the county has set me. I am trying to clear it honestly for once. That you are afraid, she said, before she had decided whether to say it. That you are as poor at loving people as you are good at mending them. And that you have arranged your whole life so that you should never have to find out. And then a dead cousin left you a little girl, and there is no arranging your way around a little girl, and it terrifies you, and you would sooner face the plague. She stopped, appalled at herself. Forgive me. The fever has made me impertinent. I forget to whom I am speaking. No, the Duke said. No, do not forget it, and do not apologize. Do you know how long it has been since anyone in this county said a true thing to my face, rather than a flattering thing to my rank? He gave a short laugh, the laugh of a man startled into honesty. You have been in my house 11 days, and you have told me more truth than the whole of the ton has managed in 5 years. It is the rudest thing in the world, and I find I cannot get enough of it. The following morning he took Tibby into the still room, where his medicines were made and dried, and gave her the small useful task of sorting dried lavender from dried chamomile into 2 jars, a thing entirely within a 6-year-old's powers and entirely gloriously useful, and Tibby did it with her tongue between her teeth for the better part of an hour, and emerged smelling of summer and radiant. With consequence, and the Duke caught Honora's eye over the child's head, and the look he gave her was not contained at all. It lasted, Honora would think afterward, a fraction longer than looks were supposed to last. 1 second, 2. Then he turned away, and it was gone, and she told herself she had imagined it, because a Duke did not look at a penniless nobody in mended muslin as though she had handed him the key to a locked room he had forgotten was his. But her feet were healing. That was the trouble with it. Her feet were healing, and she would keep all her toes. The Duke told her with a relief he did not trouble to hide, and a healed guest has no reason to remain, and the roads had long since cleared, and her aunt had written 3 increasingly frantic letters, and there was no honest way to stay 11 more mornings, or even 1. On the 12th day she left. It was Tibby who made it hard. The child had attached herself to Honora with the fierce totality of the very young and the very lonely, and when she understood that Honora meant to go, she did not weep, which was worse. She simply went very still and put the wooden robin into Honora's hand. You are to keep Robin, she said, so that you come back. Because a person comes back for the thing they love, Cousin Duke said. And Robin is the thing I love, so if you have Robin you will have to bring him back. And then you will be here, and I will make you love it here so you will stay. Tibby, I cannot take your mother's bird. He is the only. That is why, the child said, with a small child's ruthless logic. If it were a thing I did not love, it would not work. You have to give the thing you love, or the spell does not hold. Cousin Duke, tell her. The Duke, standing by the carriage in the cold bright morning, said nothing for a moment. Then he said, I have learned not to argue with her on matters of the heart. She is better at them than I am. And to Honora, lo, so the child would not hear, bring it back. Whenever you wish. There is no term set on it. You will always be welcome in this house, Miss Wexcombe. I hope you know that you have made it more of a home in 12 days than I have managed in 6 years of owning it." She should have said something clever. She had a great many clever things she was capable of saying. Instead, she closed her fingers around the little worn bird and said only, "Thank you, Your Grace, for my feet," and got into the carriage before her face could do anything she would regret, and did not look back, because if she had looked back, she was not certain she could have gone at all. She had thought that would be the end of it. A strange, bright interval, a story she would keep private and take out on cold nights, a wooden bird in a drawer. She had not reckoned on the ton, for the trouble was that a young woman cannot vanish from her aunt's card party into a snowstorm and reappear 12 days later from the house of an unmarried duke without the world constructing an explanation, and the world's explanations are never kind and never true. Mrs. Alderton, in her fright and her relief, had made the fatal error of telling the neighbors only that Honora had been taken ill in the snow and cared for, which was accurate and which sounded, to ears trained on scandal, exactly like a lie covering something worse. Where had she been ill? At the Duke's. Alone? But for the servants and the child. 12 days? 12 days. Honora watched the story build over the following fortnight, as one watches a storm come up over a flat country, helpless and clear-eyed. She could have stopped it. That was the bitter part. She had only to tell the whole of it, the crying in the garden, a small girl freezing in the snow, the 3 miles, the fever, and the story would have turned in an afternoon from scandal to sensation. And she would have been not a fallen woman, but a heroine, and the same fans that hid whispers would have fluttered in her praise. But to tell it, she must make Tibby its subject. She would have to stand in drawing rooms and describe a grieving orphan half dead in a ditch, describe the child's cold skin and clattering teeth, and the small wooden bird clutched in a fist, too frozen to feel it. And to repeat it again and again, at every party, for every fan, until a real child's worst night became a party anecdote, a thing to be exclaimed over between the soup and the fish. She would be trading Tibby's dignity for her own reputation. And there was the Duke to think of. A bachelor Duke, a dead cousin's daughter, a penniless young woman under his roof 12 days. To tell the true story loudly was to tie all 3 names together in the public mouth forever. And Honora had seen how carefully the man guarded the small new piece of that household, and she would not be the one to throw it open to the county's appetite. So she said nothing. When the whispers reached her, she met them with the same containment that had earned her the reputation for cold unfeeling, and the containment made it worse, because a guilty woman blushes and protests, and a woman with nothing to hide weeps and explains, and Honora did neither, and so the ton concluded she was either brazen or broken, and Lady Marian, who had a niece of her own to settle and one fewer rival to settle her against, encouraged them warmly in both conclusions. Here is the thing the title does not tell you. The thing Honora herself did not know until it was nearly too late. She was not the only one keeping silent to protect the others. For the Duke had learned of the whispers within the week. Servants talked between houses, and his own were fond of Miss Wexcombe and furious on her behalf, and the Duke had wanted, more than he had wanted anything in a long dry decade, to ride to the county's largest drawing room and set the record brutally straight, and he had not. Because his lawyers had told him, and told him plainly, that his guardianship of Tibby hung by a thread. There was a great uncle on the child's father's side, a hard, cold man named Selwood, with a claim of blood and a want of money, who had petitioned the court for the child's keeping and her small inheritance both, and whose whole case rested on painting the Duke as an unfit guardian, a scandalous bachelor, whose household was a byword, who kept young women of ruined reputation under his roof. For the Duke to stand up publicly and champion Honora Wexcombe, to tie his name to hers before the court had ruled, was to hand Selwood the very weapon he needed to take Tibby away. So the Duke, too, said nothing and hated himself for it, and watched from 4 miles off as the woman who had carried his ward 3 miles through a blizzard was slandered by people not fit to unlace her ruined slippers, and could do nothing, because to defend her was to lose the child, and to lose the child was the one thing he had sworn, over a small worn wooden bird, that he would never let happen. 2 people then, each keeping a silence to shield the other, each believing the silence a kindness, and between them a wall of unsaid true things, going up brick by brick, exactly as walls of unsaid things always do. It was Tibby who brought it down, as it happened, though she never knew it. The court date was set at last for the first week of the new month, and 3 days before it, the Duke received word that the hearing would turn on a single question the judge meant to ask him directly: whether any woman of doubtful character had resided in his house, and what had passed there. He sat with that all one long night, and by morning he had made a decision that his lawyers called madness, and that he called the only decent thing left to him. He would tell the truth. The whole of it. Loudly, publicly, and at once, not in the safe privacy of a courtroom where it could be twisted, but before the very people who had done the twisting, so that the county itself would carry the true story into the court ahead of him. It would tie his name to Honora's forever. It would give Selwood his weapon. It might well cost him the child. But it would give Honora Wexcombe back her name, and he found, to his own considerable surprise, that he could not go on breathing comfortably in a world where he had let it be taken from her to keep himself safe. He had spent 6 years arranging his life so that he need never risk anything he could not bear to lose. He was done with the arrangement. Some things he had learned from a girl in ruined slippers were worth the losing. He had learned where she would be. Lady Frampton's ball, the great crush of the season, 400 people, the whole of the ton under one roof. Mrs. Alderton, in a last desperate throw to prove her niece unbowed, had insisted Honora attend, and Honora, still feverish, still tender-footed, still unable to make her aunt understand why she could not simply explain herself, had gone, because it was easier than the argument, and because some stubborn splinter of her would not give the whispering room the satisfaction of hiding. And so the 2 silences, at last, came into the same room. "Before any of you says another word about this woman," the Duke said again, from one knee, in the ringing hush of Lady Frampton's ballroom, "I am going to tell you where she got these." He did not rise. He stayed there on the marble, at the level of her ruined feet, and the sight of a Duke on his knees held 400 people motionless. 12 nights ago, he said, my ward, a child of 6 years, an orphan, my cousin's daughter, whose mother is not 8 months in the ground, was thrown from a carriage into a ditch on the East Road in the storm that shut all your doors. My coachman went for help. When the help came, the child had wandered into the snow. I had 30 men out looking. I was one of them. I am a physician, and I will tell you plainly what I knew that night, standing at my window with the arithmetic in my head, that a child of 6 years, in a nightgown, in that cold, had perhaps 2 hours. I had already lost the first of them. Not a fan moved. This woman, the Duke said, whom you have spent the evening naming hysterical and unfit, this woman was at a card party 200 yards from a warm house full of people who would have sent, in an hour, for a physician who could not have come, over roads that were already gone. She heard my ward crying at the bottom of a garden. She did not send a footman. She did not go for her cloak. She took off her cloak and wrapped the child in it, and she walked 3 miles east through a blizzard, in these, and he touched, very lightly, the ruin of one silk slipper, carrying a 6-year-old, with a fever already rising in her. Because she had done the arithmetic too, and 200 yards to a delay was death, and 3 miles to a physician was a chance, and she spent herself to the last coin she had to buy that child the chance. He looked up now at Lady Marian, and his voice did not rise, but it went very cold and very clear. She walked the feeling out of her own feet, madam, so that a stranger's orphan would not lose hers to the frost. She caught the fever she is standing here burning with tonight, in the 3rd mile of that walk, and she has said not one word of it to any of you. And do you know why? I will tell you why. Because she will not. She kept silent to spare a grieving child from becoming your dinner table entertainment. She let you call her ruined, rather than let a 6-year-old's worst night be passed around this room between the soup and the fish. That is the want of proper feeling you have diagnosed in her. That is the unfitness. She is, I think, the least hysterical person in this building, and by a considerable distance the finest, and I have stood by 4 miles off and let you slander her for a fortnight to protect myself, and I am ashamed of it to the bone, and I am done. Honora had gone white. Your Grace, she whispered, the court, Tibby, you must not. You will lose her. This is the very thing. I know exactly what it is, the Duke said, still kneeling, still looking only at her now. I have thought of nothing else for 3 nights, and I have decided that I would rather stand before that judge as a man who told the truth loudly and lost everything, than as a man who kept his mouth shut and kept the child, and knew every day of her raising that I had bought her with your good name. Tibby would not want to be kept that way. She is 6, and she already knows it is better to say true things quietly than false things loudly. I am only catching up to her. He drew a breath. So here is the whole truth, and let it go where it will. I love this woman. I did not mean to. I have arranged my life for years so as to love no one and risk nothing. And then she walked 3 miles through the snow with my child in her arms and knocked the whole arrangement flat. And I have been no use to myself since. Honora Wexcombe, I am asking you before all these people, who owe you an apology and shall have a long time to make it, whether you will do me the very great honor. Stop, Honora said. The Duke stopped. A different kind of silence held the room now. Honora Wexcombe looked down at the man on his knees, and her eyes were bright with fever and with something else, and when she spoke her low voice carried after all, because the whole room had gone so still to hear it. You will not ask me that here, she said. Not like this. Do you understand me, Your Grace? I have been talked about in this room all evening as a thing without a will of her own, a hysteric to be managed, a scandal to be settled. I will not now be lifted up in the same room by the same people as a fortunate creature rescued by a duke's proposal. I did not walk 3 miles to be rescued at the end of it. I am not a woman things happen to. I am a woman who decides. She reached into her reticule and drew out a small worn wooden bird with its red breast rubbed to bare wood, and she held it up so that the candlelight caught it. This belongs to your ward. She gave it to me, so that I should have to come back. It is the only thing she has of her mother, and she put it into a near stranger's hands rather than let her go. That is the household you are asking me to doubt is fit. I have decided about that household. I decided 12 days ago. She closed her hand around the bird. Ask me at your own fireside, Your Grace, with the child in the room, where a true question belongs, and I will give you a true answer. But I will give it because I have chosen it, freely, and not because a ballroom is watching. For a moment no one breathed. Then the Duke began, slowly, to smile, the first full unguarded smile the Tun had ever seen on him, and he rose to his feet at last and bowed to her, very low, the bow of one equal to another. "Yes," he said. "You are quite right. You are always quite right. It is your most maddening quality." "At my own fireside, then, with Tibby there beside us." "With Tibby there," Honora agreed. And it was Lady Marian, of all people, who broke first, not with an apology, she was not built for apologies, but with the next best thing, which was to snap her fan shut and declare, to the room at large and to her own considerable astonishment, "Well, someone fetch the girl a chair. For heaven's sake, she is standing on ruined feet and burning with a fever, and someone fetch her aunt. And someone, Frampton, are your servants asleep? Fetch a physician who is not on his knees." And the room, released, rushed in, and the same fans that had hidden whispers now fluttered in 100 versions of a story that would be told, by morning, in every drawing-room in the county. And this time, it would be the true one. They were married in the spring, at the small church near his estate, with no crush and no Tun, only the household and the parson and Mrs. Alderton weeping happily into an entirely inadequate handkerchief. The great-uncle Selwood withdrew his petition 3 days after the ball, as it happened, and not from any softening of his hard, cold heart. He withdrew it because the whole county now knew the true story, and a man cannot easily persuade a judge that a household is unfit when that household's newest member is the acknowledged heroine of the season. The young woman who walked 3 miles through a blizzard for the very child in question. The Duke's lawyers, who had called his honesty madness, were obliged to admit that the maddest thing he had ever done had also been the shrewdest, though the Duke himself would only say that he had not done it to be shrewd. He had done it because he could not go on being a coward, and that the two had merely happened, this once, to point the same way. Tibby was 7 now, and had opinions about the wedding, chiefly regarding the flowers, and she carried the ring on a small cushion with such ferocious concentration that she forgot to be nervous. When the parson asked who gave this woman, it was Tibby, unprompted, and to the parson's visible confusion, who piped up "I do," from the front pew, and no one corrected her. Because in every way that mattered, she was right. The wooden robin lived, from that spring on the mantel of the room they used most, the small warm sitting room with the good fire, not shut away in a place of honor, but out where hands could reach it. Because Honora had said, and the Duke had agreed, that a thing that is loved wants using, not guarding. On winter evenings, the 3 of them sat by that fire, the Duke with a medical journal he was not reading, Honora with a book she was, Tibby on the hearthrug conducting long-involved diplomatic negotiations between the wooden robin and an assortment of lesser creatures, and the fire ticked, and the snow came down soft and harmless outside a window they were warm behind, and there was nowhere any of them had to be. "You never did answer me properly," the Duke said, one such evening, into the comfortable quiet, at the fireside, with the little one present, as specified. "You said you would give me a true answer, and then a great many things happened, and I begin to suspect you never actually said the word." Honora looked up from her book. Tibby looked up from the hearthrug. "Say the word," Tibby instructed. "Cousin Duke has been waiting ages. He is very patient, but I can tell. He does the thing with his jaw." "I do not do a thing with my jaw," the Duke said. "You do," said Honora and Tibby together. Honora set down her book. She reached over and took the wooden robin from the child's hands and turned it over once, the worn red breast, the rough-cut feathers, the whole of a dead woman's love in a thing the size of a plum, and then she gave it back to Tibby, who was after all its keeper. "Yes," Honora said. "That is the word. I chose it a long time ago, in a house I walked 3 miles to reach, though I did not know then what I was choosing. Yes, with the child in the room. Freely and loudly, this once, since you have waited so patiently and done the thing with your jaw. I do not, the Duke began, and then gave it up, and crossed the small warm room, and kissed his wife once, gently by the fire, while a 7-year-old covered her eyes and declared it disgusting, and did not, anyone could see, mean a word of it. A house is not made a home by the grandeur of the people who are welcomed into it, but by the smallness of the ones it refuses to turn away. The Duke of Ravenscar had a very great house, and it had stood cold for years, and it was made warm at last not by a duke's fortune, but by a girl who would not leave a stranger's child out in the cold, and a man who would rather lose everything than let her be called unfit for it. There are worse things to build a life on. There are, in the end, very few better. If this story warmed you, tell us in the comments which city you are listening from, and what the moment by the fire made you feel, and if you would like more tales like this one, of quiet courage and kindness that costs something and is worth it, do subscribe to The Hearth, and we will keep a candle lit for you.